So if you've been watching my channel all the way back to the first month that I had it up in 2015, you will know that I like to simplify things. I think it's important to get to the root cause of everything. Because the more we get caught up in the weeds, the easier it is for people to take those things and to complicate them to as many ends as you can possibly complicate them. But at the end of the day, they always mean the same thing. Now, again, talking about if you've watched my channel any significant amount of time, you've probably also heard me mention duality and how we're always caught up in a left and right paradigm. Now, I think most of you understand the fundamental principle behind that to at least some extent, meaning that we're put on a left side or right side and we're meant to fight each other and there's no other option but left and right. Most of you understand, like, no, it's not always that way. Like, most people understand that to some degree, but I don't believe most people understand it to the point to where it really is. How fundamentally true this is for everything. When I say everything, believe me, I have tested this theory on everything and it seems to come out. Now, you probably see these two charts here, or diagrams, graphs, whatever you want to call them. They're both representing something in two different ways, and I'm going to explain both of them for you. I'm going to start out with the left one, because the left one is the most commonly used in everything. And I do mean everything, because if you boil down arguments in every argument, you will always find that there's two key principles in these arguments. That's life and death. The main reasons for any actions in humans usually boil down to life and death. Or at least that's how those in power would want you to see everything. A duality, a black and white. Everything has its counterpart. Happy has sad, good has evil, light has dark. And all of these things have their counterpart, which are true to some extent. There is definitely some truth to that. But this is a fundamental failure of looking at things in reality. But let's look at this chart here. So I have life here and death here. And in our current existence, our three-dimensional life that we all live in, you can't have one of these without the other. It's just impossible. You can't die unless you first lived, and you can't live unless death is involved. Anything that's alive dies. And then we have this element that's in between this that is also needed. It is just as needed as life and death in our three-dimensional world, because unless there's time, there is no progression. It's just a stalemate. There's no action in between life and death. And this model right here that I'm showing you, just this up and down, very linear progression, that there is only this tower that you can climb up, is the belief system and the principle that every control group, organization, or anyone that's seeking power follows to some extent. Because when all there is life and death, the most important thing is time. So in their eyes, anything is justified in acquiring more time, because that's the rational thing to do in their mind. Time is worshipped as a god by a lot of these secret organizations. That's why they're so heavily involved in things like time travel and esoteric practices that will extend their life, and transhumanism, and the belief of passing on your brain, which they believe generates consciousness, into some sort of digital AI. And this isn't conspiracy. You go look into any of these organizations or groups and it's spilling out from the seams. It's very obvious that the most important thing to them is time, and they worship time, and they want as much time as possible. Just look at all of these people, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, Soros, or any of the old geezers that support any of these political figures, and you find their hands and their money sprinkled in everywhere in the political scene, or things that they can manipulate to benefit them to extend their time. You find them. You find old geezers, the people that will benefit from these systems that are in play all over the world. Nothing they want more than time, enough time to carry out their progress and the potential of carrying on their existence in this three-dimensional existence that we all are present in as long as possible. They're trying to, with enormous success, pass this ideology on to the people. And like I've said in the past, when you create a game, which the left-right paradigm, which is still represented under this chart, life, death, left, right, black and white, blue and red, you're controlling the game. So the more the people are bought into your belief system, the more you can control them, the more that you can rig the outcome to your will. You control the dice. You control every possible outcome in this scenario. because you're leaving out fundamental principles about life in itself. But like I said, this is what we see in most belief systems nowadays. And by belief systems, I'm not talking about just religion or things like that, although it is definitely making its way into religion and a lot of religions as well. But I'm talking about all types of belief systems, about everything. And all of these belief systems are missing a key component, because when there's only two key components, or you replace a third element with something that shouldn't be representative of that third element, such as time, when you try to place time as a third element here, you just get caught up in the whole fundamentally wrong belief systems that we have now today that shows up in science, religion, politics, even the way we treat people on a day-to-day life. We prioritize living over everything else. And don't get me wrong, living is very important, because without living you can't experience other things. But it is definitely not the be-all, end-all. You see, this is why I preach, and I hate that word, preach about freedom is more important than safety. At the end of the day, having the choice to make the wrong decision is your choice. It shouldn't be anyone else's choice. Who gave that person the right to dictate how I live or how long I live? Even if it was from the kindest of heart and just the most honest thing, and it happens. There are people that truly believe what they're doing and controlling other people's life is good and good for them and good for everyone in the whole society. And you can point at certain points that might lead to that being true in a echo chamber or in an isolated incident, but they're not taking the whole picture into mind here. You can say, well, if I didn't get you to wear that mask, your grandmother would have died, even though she probably would have died a year or two later from another ailment or disease. But they don't look at all the other consequences of giving in to things like that. It doesn't matter how petty you think it is, but any freedom you hand over is just less free will that you have. The less you have, the less you can bargain with, and the tighter that noose around this system becomes. You become stuck in this linear system. Now, I'm probably taking a long time to describe this, and I really want to get over to this other chart because a lot of thought, and I mean a lot, years of thought went into developing this chart. It's not just some stupid idea that I had. Although there were key moments where I'm just like, yeah, that clicks. But a lot of thought went into coming up with this. I had to do a lot of research and a lot of comparison and trying to run things through these ideas to make sure that they held true, because I don't want to put out nonsense or something that's not going to benefit you. I think I gave a good understanding of what this side is. This is the general thing that most people will hold on to. Think of anything in your life. Think of any belief system out there and apply it to that, and it will make so much sense. I guarantee it. But let's look at this other chart here. Now, as you can tell, it still incorporates life and death, because again, like I said, you can't have one without the other. And still we have time there, because you have to have a movement of events happening, which is time, which some believe it's a physical thing, and some think it's just it's just representative of that movement of time. I just think it's a name for something that happens rather than it's a physical thing, but neither here nor there, it still applies the same. So you have the typical chart that control groups use. Now, to break free of this game that they have, this game where they removed a key element, you have to have that third element that gives it a third dimension. It gives it space, it gives it property. And that's why once I implement this third element here, as you can probably read what it is, it gives it space in between. It gives it volume. It's something. You can't ignore the third dimension. If this was represented by dimensions, these three cornerstones would be them. Now, what order they're in, I can't really tell you that. But you need all three of these for life at all, life in general. So I think I should explain the third element here. Now it says consciousness or awareness. They basically mean the same thing, although you can take them to higher levels. And what your idea of consciousness, even if you do believe that the brain generates consciousness, that's not my belief, but there's a lot of people that hold that belief. I understand how they got to that point, and I'm not going to bash them for that. This isn't a video about bashing beliefs. This is just about the fundamental principles of life in itself. So you could fit that into this chart, and it would still make perfect sense. So all consciousness means, and awareness means in this, is that we are aware. We're not just alive. You have to be aware of the things happening, otherwise you will just be alive. You can't dictate anything you do. In fact, you can't do really anything. You need this third element, the element of awareness, or being an observer of the world around you and yourself in general, to have space, to have volume. You have to have a third point of view. Otherwise, this doesn't exist. There wouldn't be 3 dimensions. It would just be a linear thing. And this might be hard to understand, so I have a pretty good way of explaining it. Now let's think of these 2 charts in terms of sound or music. If this left chart was a song, all this song would be is a sine wave. And if you don't know what a sine wave is, just type that into YouTube and you'll get an example. It is just a monotone sound or frequency that has no variation. It's just a solid hum. There's no major ups and downs or any changes or any depth to it. It is just that single sound wave. Now, if a living being, if life in itself was that sound wave, it would have no properties, no definition, no volume, nothing to describe it. It would just be alive. Now, if this right chart was a song, it could be any number of songs, anything. It could be talking, it could be any sound that has ups and downs, because it has a third dimension. It has an element, it has volume, it has space, it has defining properties. Now, even though you're aware of something, even though you're conscious of it, you still need 2 other elements to tie this all together. Hence why you see these 2 other in between. And these took me a long time to figure out. But once I did, it was just like, it's just so simple, it makes sense. But if you just look at life and death and how time is needed for these 2 things to operate, how we see them operating in our 3-dimensional existence, because we don't have a 2-dimensional existence, you have to think about what is needed to make these 2 directions operate in the same way that time makes these operate. And let me go ahead and say that every one of these things are needed in this chart. You can't remove any of them or it all starts to crumble. The first one I came up with was memory. And again, a lot of thought went into this because we have life and consciousness. You can't have memory without consciousness, because without consciousness, without being aware of what's happening, you're just alive. And to have thought, to have ideas, you have to remember the things that happen to you. And let me tell you, this is needed for everything, even instincts, because people will say, well, you just have natural instincts, which I have put that into account. And I've had many debates with great friends of mine, and I thank them to death because it actually helped me flush out my chart even more. But you need memory for even things such as instinct, muscle memory, because even though you're not consciously thinking about these things, they're still happening because your body remembers them. That's still a form of memory. Even if you say, well, it's from past generations that lived on and passed that on through DNA, it's still a form of memory. Like the DNA itself is holding that memory. And someone had to be conscious of it at some point in time, whether that's fully aware or subconsciously, it's still a form of consciousness. They are aware of it. You need memory. Otherwise, you are just a vegetable. And that's probably not the best definition, but that's the closest I can get to explaining this. You're just alive with no defining properties. You have to have memory to have any action at all, even breathe. And you might say, well, that's not true. Because you die, it generates that need to breathe or to keep yourself alive. Now, that's true to some extent, but that's how I generated the third subcategory in this entire chart, sense. Because death and consciousness, what is this? You say, well, since we die, we need to have certain actions. We need to breathe. We need to be able to move or avoid predators. You don't really even think about the fact of why the predators are even trying to do what they do. You say, well, they're hungry. They need to eat. They need to do that. But how do they even generate those things? They need memory to do those, to even remember that their body is telling them that they're hungry, because without that, there is no recall of anything. You have to be conscious of that. You have to be conscious that you're alive in the first place to even know that you can die. So this generates this other property, sense. Because what are senses? If you look up the definition, it'll essentially tell you that they are physical sensations that all living things generate out of the necessity to keep themselves alive. Hence why there's a connection between consciousness and death. Again, you can't know that you're going to die unless you're consciously aware of it. So feeling pain, which is probably one of the first senses you would develop, or knowing that you're hungry, or you need to eat, or you need to breathe, or you need to do one thing or the other to survive. Hearing predators, seeing with your eyes, seeing that there's danger, or anything that helps you benefit staying alive, are senses. This is how you fit this into this triangular pattern here. You need all of these things to exist. You can't look at this all in this life and death linear scheme. It's just not, it's not how things work. Even things such as childbirth and keeping your species going is still a form of life and death, senses and memories, because you need all of these things. Even time, you need the progression of time, you need space and volume, the very existence of something in the first place. You need all of these things because childbirth is still a form of trying to keep your generation going, your lineage going, because you understand, whether it's on a conscious level or a subconscious DNA, muscle memory, whatever you want to think of it as reason, that you need to keep going, so you generate offspring to keep it all going. So you're probably wondering, okay, what's the big deal? You just gave definitions to things that we could have explained, even though it's in simpler terms, on the left chart. But here's the reason why this is so important, that we look at things in a three-dimensional perspective. And by three-dimension, I just mean you give the whole situation volume, you give it property, is because when there is just a two-dimensional game that you are playing on any level of your life and belief in anything, when there's only two options, there can never truly be a victor. Somebody can win temporarily, but it's going to start over again. And it's a never-ending life, death, life, death, life, death struggle. It's a non-stop struggle. If you look at the entire existence of, let's say, the Jewish people, and I've done a documentary on this. Look up the origins of Sabbateanism. Their whole entire reason ending up in modern-day Zionism is because they were caught up in this lifelong, generational-long life and death struggle, and they did anything, and I do mean anything, that was required, all morals set aside, to keep their people going. That was the most important thing. It didn't matter what they had to do it, and this is still true to this day. All things set aside, the reason they fought so hard and did subversion, corruption, and all means necessary to see the end goal, all that mattered was that they kept on going. They just wanted to find more time. They got their people more time, because they were caught up in this very linear way of thinking, that there's not more to life in itself than just staying alive. It's the most important. Time is the most important thing. That's why people that have this sense of belief, and I'm not saying it's wholly a Jewish way of believing, because it's not. It's a fundamental principle. So it ends up showing its head in every organization, every belief system. You name it, it's there in some degree. But their whole goal was staying alive. They needed to protect their people, and they needed to return to their land. And it didn't matter what laws and morals and whatever it took to step over for them to achieve that. Hell, they're still doing it to this day. They're still killing off the Palestinians and taking that land because they hold some ancient deed to the land, so they feel that they can do anything to achieve that, even though they, take care of the media to make them look like the good guys in the situation. But all that matters is keeping going what they believe is the right thing to do. They generally believe this is right, and to some extent I can't blame them, because this is a way that the large majority of the world believes. Even though if you took consciousness and you had it like at different levels over here, like maybe a little bit they think about it, but they don't think about it as a third fundamental principle that is just as important as living and dying. Just as important. Every one of these points in this chart over here are just as important. Trying to fight something that no matter how hard you try. Let's say, for example, that they developed an AI system that they could implant their brain consciousness into, and it could keep their consciousness or awareness going in this hybrid Frankenstein form going for hundreds of thousands of years. Eventually, something will happen to this earth or to this universe. Something will happen that will eventually cause this stuff to degrade. Anything that's material in this goes through this regeneration process. Nothing in this three-dimensional world is eternal. So eventually you will still die, even if the so-called brain generated that consciousness and you kept it going for a longer time. It's eventually going to fade away to dust. Eventually, everyone you've ever known in this lifetime, no matter how famous or popular or worshipped by these people, will eventually, if they are three-dimensional, they will not exist, and no one will remember them given enough time. So there is no end goal to this, such as like time immortality, Even though they fantasize about, like I said, time travel and whatnot, it's all about trying to bargain for as much time as possible. And like I said, with the Jews, they were trying to keep their people or their belief system alive as long as possible. And like I said, in the moment, I probably wouldn't disagree with that if I didn't have the full context. And I'm not saying what the people did to them, and especially what they did to other people to try to keep themselves alive, was justified. A lot of times it's like revenge for revenge, and like we know, they can hold a very long grudge. But at the end of the day, it is the neglect that there is more to life than living, being alive for as long as possible. Because if you're locked up in a cell your entire life, that's not a very good life. Even if you live to be 120 years old, what has that gained you? What have you learned from that? What do you take out of that? Was that a very happy life? No, it was not. So living a life that equally benefits all of these different categories. Yes, you want to live a healthy life and most people want to live a long life, one that's filled with pleasant senses, but there are going to be some bad senses. You can't avoid them. And happy and or beneficial, which negative memories can benefit you in different ways. We learn from our mistakes and the things that happen to us, even if they're very bad and traumatizing. We need all of these things. We need consciousness. And we need this whole system of balancing out our life so we can all be happy or sad or whatever we choose to do, as long as that we respect others. You see, when the most important thing in your life becomes how long you live, you start to neglect other people's life. Because some martyrs are people that stand up for what they believe in, even if it means pain, death, torture. They recognize that in them doing that, it's fulfilling to this part of life, your consciousness, your awareness, and your other things. Although you're cutting this one short, let's say you give in to something. In the example of the Jews, they gave in. They went underground in their belief system. They didn't stand up for what they believe in because they knew the ultimate price that they would have to pay was death. Although there were some that did, this belief system that these other things aren't just as important as living were neglected. And again, I understand why that happens. People are scared. That's why this system is hyped up. It's pushed in your face. Fear, 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 fear. Fear of death. Fear of losing our time. Pushing our awareness away. Trying to pretend like this stuff doesn't matter. How you live your life doesn't matter. As long as we keep going. As long as we keep passing it on. Now, there are some circumstances where you can let this slip, but ultimately, in an ideal society, standing true to your core principles is a very fulfilling thing to do. That's why I have a high respect for martyrs. And by martyrs, I don't mean people that are, going out there hurting other people or, suiciding, bombing, or taking out their frustrations on other people that are innocent. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a martyr. I'm talking about someone that stands up for their belief system, no matter what the consequence is, even if it is this ultimate death. Because at the end of the day, they took into consideration this, and this, and this. I need to make it very clear, I'm not bashing you if you're caught up in that system. Because I was caught up in that system. Everybody was caught. Unless you're born a guru or something, nobody just comes out the womb with the ability to take apart this entire society that's built around us, that is built on this model. We are indoctrinated into it. So I have a lot of sympathy for people that are still caught up in that trap, that game, that unwinnable game. There's no way to win it. You give up a little bit of your freedom thinking, oh, eventually it'll come back around. Maybe that's true, but it's very unlikely. Because when you're playing in that game, it's rigged. They don't take in consideration your other senses, your feelings, your life. That doesn't matter. It's like, oh, you want to live, don't you? That's the most important thing in the scenario. Yes, it's important to live. Of course, I am an anti-war advocate and I stand against violence in all of the senses. I don't believe in violence. I believe in the non-aggression principle. The only reason you should ever be aggressive with someone is if they are directly threatening your life. Then at that point, you have a right to defend yourself. And don't go out and tell me that, oh, well, you wearing a mask, you're killing people, you're doing this and that, even though that's always been a thing. But if you are sick or ill or have other diseases, of course there's always going to be exemptions. And of course the media that are trying to trick you into staying on this other side are just going to highlight nothing but the exemptions. But those sickly people or older people or people with weaker immune systems even if this was 100% true, should know that, and then they can decide for themselves, do I want to wear a mask? Do I want to stay away from people? Is it more dangerous for me to go out than it is to do this or that? Everybody should not have to pay the price. Even the most grotesque estimates right now are 1%, and that is still highly overblown because they're misrepresenting the data. They've always misrepresented data when it fits an agenda. That's just the truth. And if you believe that they're always going to tell you the 100% truth, then I mean, more power to you, but it's a really naive way to perceive things, because when you dig into it and look into the facts that they present to you, you will start to see that there are not things lining up. But even at 1%, man, the other 99% have to pay the price and give up their freedoms, even if it's just hundreds of small ones. We have to give up our privilege to be aware and conscious and to enjoy our life. We have to give up this because of this. No, not for 1%. Those people, they have the choice, the freedom to stay in their safety. But maybe I don't want to be that safe. Maybe I want to live a little, you know? Because if there was no danger in life, it would be a very boring existence. If it was just always perfect and peaceful, there would be no variety in life. All of these things are needed to generate a good life experience. And the more we try to force one point or the other out of it, I even have this gripe with certain belief systems that think that we can try to get rid of this one up here, death, in this three-dimensional existence that we are currently a part of. That, if we somehow get rid of death and pain and all the negative emotions, we will be in this bliss. But you don't realize that you have to have a contrast in life. You have to have variety, or those good emotions don't mean the same thing as they do now. You know that happiness you feel when you fall in love with someone? That means something to you because you have been lonely. You understand what it's like to be alone or to be without that connection. You know that feeling you get when you come back after a hard day's work or a workout or an exercise, and you're sore and you're hurting, and then you come home and you relax, or you take a hot shower, bath, or whatever you do to relax. We only have that satisfaction because we went through that hardship. And all of those negative emotions tend to lean on the death side, because it's one of these senses or memories telling you, hey man, this is bad because it can lead to your death. We need that experience to enjoy the life portion, the appreciation. And when we take away all these elements and we're just looking at life, death, we kind of lose the appreciation for life in general. Because it's like, what's the point, man? Like, what are we fighting for? What we are fighting for is the right to have bad days, the right to endure pain, or the right to put our lives in danger because we think we will have a more fulfilling life from it. We can't go around as the kid wrapped up in bubbles and a helmet and floaties and whatever protection we have our entire life and expect that, we can never get hurt, we can never have a cut, we can never do this, we can't expose ourselves to pathogens even though we need that to help our immune system grow and to fight away these diseases in the first place. And you say, well, think about grandma. Grandma had her life. You know, grandma has the choice to avoid these. She can wear a mask. That's just one of the things, man. We can't compromise our entire existence because what you're thinking is, oh man, we're eventually the more freedoms we take away, the faster this is all gonna go away. And then nothing's like this is gonna happen ever again. Even if all this is true and this is like the government never tells you the lie, never lies or does anything in their favor. Imagine it's all 100% true. What's gonna happen when the soonest coronavirus is gone and then the very next day there's another disease and it's even worse and it's killing 5%? Well, there goes your freedoms again. There's never an end to it. They can continue to weed away at your freedoms forever until you are essentially just a bubble wrapped up slave that can't do anything or experience life. Because no, we don't want you to die. I mean, that's the price we pay for being alive in the first place. That's how our reality works. And the more we understand that all of these things are necessary, even the bad, then the more fulfilling our life will be. Now, I think this video is really long and it's probably needed. I need to explain this, but man, it feels like a weight off of my chest because I needed to say this, I needed to explain this, and I'm finally glad that I have a chart, something visual, because I need visual hands-on for me to understand stuff. I need to see it. I can read a million things, but I have to figure out a way to mentally visualize all those things that I read anyway. So if it helps me out, hopefully it helps some of you. Even if I just, hopefully opened up the perspective of a few dozen people, I will feel so great and feel so fulfilled for this video. I'm going to try to trim this down, but hope you appreciate it. Now, if you do appreciate the work that I do here, you can help me out, because just like all of us right now, we are suffering because of these incidents that we're going through, and even keeping ourselves afloat is very hard. So if you want to help me in that, you can send me money through Patreon, PayPal, Bitcoin, and Litecoin, and help me keep this fight going, man. I don't want to give up just because things got hard, and neither should you, neither should any of us. Keep standing up for the truth, stand up for what we believe in, even when there's consequences that are going to negatively affect us. And most importantly, continue to keep your eyes open. And as always, this has been Tyranny Unmasked.